Well, hi, this is Steve Hall. Thanks for checking out video number 11 in our Veritas series. Do you by any chance recognize this man? You probably don't, but he was pretty prominent and notorious in his day. He died in 2010, and until 2007, he was one of the leading spokesmen for atheism in the world. He was a philosopher and often took part in debates arguing for the side of atheism against those who argued for the existence of God. In the year 2007, he changed his mind. One of the most outspoken atheists in the world said that no longer could he maintain his atheism. He became a believer in God. His name is Antony Flew, and in 2007, Antony Flew said, "The integrated complexity of life itself, which is far more complex than the physical universe, can only be explained in terms of an intelligent source." So what we're going to do in the next few minutes is take a look very briefly just at the highlights of some of the things that caused him to renounce his atheism and believe in God. We only have time here to look at a very few of the basic points in this very complex subject, but I think you'll get the idea. When Charles Darwin published his Origin of Species in 1859, which, as you may know, radically changed the thinking of many scientists from then on, especially those who wanted to leave God out of the picture because it gave them a way of explaining life without reference to God. Scientists did not really understand what the basic building blocks of life were like. In their mind, the simplest life was a little blob of jelly they called protoplasm that somehow had the quality of life, and in their minds it was quite simple. But beginning in the last half of the 20th century, leading right up until now in the 21st century, a group of scientists called molecular biologists began to really understand what basic life was like on a molecular level, and it was astounding. They discovered that the very most basic form of living thing, instead of being a simple little blob of jelly called protoplasm, was incredibly complex. So they discovered that the most basic form of life that can reproduce itself is like a little city with highly organized activity going on. Mind-bogglingly complex. So scientists know now that for some little basic form of life to get started that can reproduce itself, and of course that's the critical thing, it has to be able to reproduce itself, would require literally billions, not hundreds, not thousands, not even millions, billions of atoms arranged in a very precise and extremely complex organization. I mean, we're talking something amazingly, mind-bogglingly complex. It's like a city, an entire city in every single living cell. You may have seen models of living cells like this one, maybe in a biology textbook, and maybe you thought, wow, that looks fairly complicated. But believe me, it is nothing compared to the real thing. Real cells are so mind-bogglingly complex they could never be represented in a simple drawing like this. They're like cities. For example, even the simplest and most basic kinds of life that can be imagined would require hundreds of proteins. And proteins are very complex molecules made up of thousands of atoms. They're composed of amino acids, and those amino acids have to fold upon themselves just exactly the right way for the protein to function and carry out its purpose, and that has to be engineered. That information has to be given to the protein or whatever's assembling the protein so that it can be assembled in the correct fashion to carry out its function. Incredibly complex. And of course, a cell would require RNA molecules, messenger RNA molecules, and a DNA molecule. And a DNA molecule is incredibly complex. It's like a library of information. That's what a DNA molecule is. It's a collection of information with billions of organized atoms in that one molecule. So in every DNA molecule, all the information that determines what an animal or a person is going to be like, all the little details are programmed into that DNA. And like I said, it's like a library. As molecules go, it's a huge molecule, at least in length. It's a very long molecule. Now, its diameter is not very big. The diameter is about 2 nanometers. That's pretty tiny. But it's folded up like a little ball. So if you stretched it out, it would be about 6 feet long. That's a pretty long molecule. But to give you an idea of what we're talking about here, if you enlarge the diameter of the DNA molecule so that it was about the diameter of your little finger, it would be thousands of miles long. And all along those thousands of miles would be information programmed into the DNA. This huge amount of information is required for the construction and the upkeep of a living organism. It's monstrously, mind-bogglingly complex. Now stay with me here. We're talking about something that has to be in existence all at once for it to function. Do you understand what I'm saying? These incredibly complex proteins and incredibly complex DNA, these molecules are not independent of each other. You can't have a DNA molecule out there on its own that somehow figures out how to reproduce and make more DNA molecules. It doesn't happen. Scientists can't even make it happen. Protein synthesis, the building of proteins, that can't go on, for example, without a cell membrane. But a cell membrane can't exist without protein synthesis. Proteins have to be put together to make the cell membrane. They're interdependent. They're not independent. All living cells have systems that will allow the information in the DNA to be transferred to other molecules. Okay? It's like a translational system to take this information out. But those translational systems depend totally on certain kinds of enzymes. They can't function without those enzymes. But those enzymes can't exist until the translational system is in place. Do you understand what I'm trying to say here? These things are totally interdependent. They depend on each other. They have to exist all at once. And there are many more examples of this kind of thing within a living cell. So the problem for those who want to leave God out of the picture is how on earth does a tiny living cell that's like a little city just kind of burst on the scene suddenly without any design, without any planning, without any creation, just kind of pops into existence? It's inconceivable. You know, even if you try to picture it over a long period of time, these complex molecules cannot assemble themselves. They have to have other complex molecules helping them get assembled. And even if you had billions of years of random collisions, trillions of years, they cannot form into these complex molecules. The second law of thermodynamics keeps that from happening. And hopefully later we can look at the second law of thermodynamics in a little more detail. And if by some stretch of the imagination some of these atoms seem to come together by chance just to begin to form some of these more complicated molecules, they wouldn't stay together. They would all fall apart. That's the second law of thermodynamics. So do you see the point? In order for life to exist without God, just leaving God out of it, this incredibly complicated system of molecules would have to spring into existence all at the same time, totally undirected, by sheer chance, fully functioning. And it's absurd. Listen to this incredible quote from an evolutionist, Francis Crick, brilliant scientist, co-discoverer of DNA, Nobel Prize winner. This is what he said. What's so frustrating for our present purpose is that it seems almost impossible to give any numerical value to the probability of what seems a rather unlikely sequence of events. Talk about an understatement. That was an understatement. An honest man, armed with all the knowledge available to us now, could only state that in some sense the origin of life appears at the moment to be almost a miracle. It's really hard for him just to come right out and say it, but he gets pretty close. And I love this quote from Fred Hoyle, British mathematician and astronomer. The probability of life originating at random is so utterly minuscule as to make it absurd. And then he used this illustration. The chance that higher life forms might have emerged in this way is comparable with the chance that a tornado sweeping through a junkyard might assemble a Boeing 747 jet from the materials therein. The evidence for God is very clear, very dramatic in his creation. He's left us no excuse. And so today, the truth of Romans chapter 1, verse 19 and 20 is even more clear than it ever has been in the past. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So they are without excuse. So now you know why Sir Anthony Flew changed his mind.